What's up everyone, Darcblade here with another Mass Effect 3 multiplayer revamped guide, where I go back and take a look at some of the classes who have had their builds changed since their original video. In this episode I'm going to be covering a class whose original build was fine, but I wanted to cover an alternative build for this class, the Awakened Collector. A lot of what I covered in the original video still applies to this build, but I wanted to cover it nonetheless. I will still advise though going back and checking out the original build, as it is still viable and maybe better for some players. The build used in the original video is a balanced build that focuses on dealing a fair amount of damage while at the same time being able to take a hit or two. Despite the build attempting to be balanced, it still left the Awakened Collector fairly squishy. This new build in this video adds more survivability to the class. Remember, the builds I use are for the harder difficulties in the game. I start by maxing out Dark Sphere, taking Unstable Dark Sphere, Recharge Speed and Damage. I'm taking these ability modifiers to enable the Dark Sphere to deal a decent amount of damage and to be used as often as possible. Next I max out Seeker Swarms, putting points into swarm count, damage reduction and recharge speed. Next I go up to rank 4 in Dark Channel, focusing on damage over duration. With the passive abilities I start by maxing out Vengeful Ancient, putting points into power damage and damage and capacity. If you want to focus on a weaponry build, then take weapon damage talent points over the power damage ones. However, a weaponry build relies on you having a high level collector or Prothean weapon for the best results. With Ancient Warrior I go up to rank 4, putting points into durability. If you wanted to, you could put more points into fitness, but would mean you have to sacrifice points elsewhere. As for weaponry, go for a collector or Prothean weapon, as the Awakened Collector gains bonus damage for using such weaponry. Now for the permanent gear slot, take something to increase your survivability. Now the build may not seem too different from the original, it just has a few points here and there that have switched. However, the way the Awakened Collector is used has changed. Before, I would combine all three abilities together. This has now switched in favour of giving the Awakened Collector that extra survivability. The main thing you have to realise with this build is not to waste your Seeker Swarms, as these are your prime defensive ability. Only use them when you know you won't be under a lot of fire and have time to resummon them. Your main damage dealing abilities will be Dark Sphere and Dark Channel. You will also be using your weaponry a lot more. With this build you won't be relying on biotic combos, unlike the original one. You can still prime foes for biotic explosions, but they will have to be activated by your teammates. For those of you who do not know, a biotic explosion is a combo where a foe is primed for an ability like Dark Sphere or Dark Channel and then followed up with another second direct damaging biotic ability to create a biotic explosion that deals extra damage to targets. The only way the Awakened Collector can set off its own biotic explosions is with Seeker Swarms, but we are saving them as a defensive tool. The main rotation I use with my abilities for this build is to throw out a Dark Sphere, noting to throw it towards the floor where foes will be. After I throw out a Dark Channel, I will then proceed to wait a few seconds for the damage over time effects to tick in a few times. After, when there's enough foes near the Dark Sphere, or they are about to move out of its radius, I detonate the sphere. Detonating the Dark Sphere deals a lot of damage, and will be your main offensive ability. After the detonation, if there are any foes left alive, the Dark Channel should continue to tick and bring the remaining foes down. If there are multiple foes left alive, then the Dark Channel will jump to the next target after it's taken out its initial target. A side note is that activating the Dark Sphere, detonating it, will override the cooldown times for the Awakened Collector. A quick tip as well is that if you are in a safe position, use your heavy melee to activate Ascension mode to give the Awakened Collector more damage, but at the risk of taking more damage. In between all of this, you should strive to deal as much weapon damage as possible. Note that if you're using heavier weaponry, you won't be able to cast this rotation as often and will have to rely on your weaponry and ability dots instead. So as you can see that this rotation is simplified when compared to the original build, as you do not rely on the Seeker Swarms in an offensive way. Your Seeker Swarms are there to defend you. As you have 4 swarms around you, thanks to points in swarm count, you will gain 40% damage reduction, which really helps reduce incoming damage. If you wanted to, you could sacrifice points elsewhere to max out the Ancient Warrior tree. This will give you an even bigger health and shield pool. Another change you could consider with this build is to swap the points in Vengeful Ancient, putting them instead into weapon damage and use this class as a weapon based class with some minor dot abilities. Doing this though requires that you have a high level collector or Prothean weapon for best results. Overall, I feel this build works. It does help a lot of players survive on the harder difficulties. The main difference for this build when compared to the original is how the Seeker Swarms are used. However, it feels less rewarding and less complex when compared to the original build. That being said, there is room for error with this build and doesn't rely on a team setup for maximum results. I always prefer the power damage Awakened Collector to the weaponry one, as there are better weaponry classes out there, and this is the only class that has the awesome Dark Sphere ability, so I feel it's worth using. This build may not allow the Awakened Collector to be the biggest damage dealer out there on the field, but it does allow him to take more damage, and for some players out there, they may prefer this build. Remember too that this is an alternative build. The original build still functions well and is still viable, so check it out if you haven't already. And until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you a Mass Effect 3 multiplayer revamped guide to the Awakened Collector. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.